But the third one is actually the short war scenario where the Russian army absolutely collapses. And once that happens, those things then start happening quickly.
Now, it is 5:39. Time then to invite you into our daily briefing room, where one of our leading tactical and strategic minds with years of experience as a general officer at the highest level of military command share insights into the state of the war in Ukraine. Today, I can welcome Major General Chip Chapman, a former senior British military advisor to the USA. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, John.
Hi. Can I just get your thoughts on this? Last night, I'm sure you may have seen this extraordinary exchange on Russian state TV, the top talk show there about Ukraine, where a military analyst, a retired colonel, Mikhail Kodorenok, broke ranks, it seemed, and told the anchor of the program, well, some bleak truths. Have a listen.
You shouldn't take informational sedatives. Sometimes you hear reports about a moral psychological breakdown in the Ukrainian armed forces. Their mood is allegedly close to a crisis. To put it mildly, this is not true. But returning to NATO, what should I say? The most important thing is to remain realistic from a political and military standpoint. If you don't, then sooner or later reality will hit you so hard you won't know what's hit you. The most important thing here is not to brandish missiles for goodness sake in the direction of Finland. This looks comical. The biggest problem with our military and political situation is that we are in total geopolitical isolation and that the world is against us, even if we don't want to admit it. We need to resolve this situation.
Well, General, there's a lot there a lot of people would recognise, but to hear it on state TV from an authoritative analyst like that was extraordinary.
It was, but it's realism. It's pragmatic realism in foreign policy terms, but he's not a foreign policy decision maker. But it conforms to what we talk about as the Clausewitzian trinity, where you have three parts that need to really be in sync in a triangle if you're going to campaign successfully. The first one is the armed forces, and you can't pull the wool over those who are being battered on the ground. The second one is the population, and you can propagandize until that starts falling apart. And the third one is the government and the political polity. And if that starts fracturing, it often fractures very quickly. So somewhere in that remarkable trinity, as Clausewitz called it, the Prussian general, that will happen. And that looks like it's beginning to accelerate pace in Russia. And that's why, there are no certainties, only scenarios. But Liz Truss saying about 10-year war, probably too much. Blinken saying that we don't know how how long the war will last. Of course we don't. But the third one is actually the short war scenario where the Russian army absolutely collapses. And once that happens, those things then start happening quickly. But also that's a dangerous moment because Putin, being as he is,
yes,
he may well escalate at that time.
Yeah, just so remarkable to see the dark reality of what is happening to the Russian military that's penetrating into Russia itself, despite the hopes of one imagined or had imagined the hierarchy there to keep people in the darks, looking on a brighter picture. And on that question of Putin, so we're hearing from Western military sources now that Putin is involved in the fight now in the war as if he were a colonel or a brigadier. So as a former proper general, what do you make of that? What does that tell us?
Well, it's an absolute disaster. If you look at what Churchill said at the summit, true politics and strategy are one. The worst thing you can do is have the disaster of the long screwdriver when you've got a political leader at the top interfering at the tactical level. That is a disaster. And the real reason for that is if he's interfering at the battalion tactical group, there are a number of layers above that. You've got the brigade, the division, a corps, an army group, a front. So that paralyzes decision making if you're waiting for someone in Moscow who needs to be back briefed to then come forward with decisions. And the decision cycle of the Russians is therefore negated by the decision cycle and agility of the Ukrainians, who will always beat them to the tactical punch. So from a Ukrainian perspective, it's delightful that he's doing that. From a Russian perspective, it's absolutely disastrous.
Is there such a thing as a as a momentum when it comes to a war, a conflict of this kind? We're now getting more and more reports of serious losses of Russian soldiers, of depletion of equipment, of deteriorating morale, and the opposite happening on the Ukrainian side, where they are in high spirits, they're getting better and better equipped, and really holding the Russians at bay, sometimes better than that. Is there such a thing as momentum?
There is, but we need to be slightly careful that we haven't got confirmation bias, because we're seeing most of the portrayal from the Ukrainian and Western media. There's three things I would caveat on the Russian side. Firstly, from which caveats the Ukraine and the West. The first one is the Russian blockade of the Ukrainian coast is still successful. They can't get their grain out. The second one is the sort of destruction, degradation of the military, industrial, and economic potential of of Ukraine by the deep campaign of missiles by Russia. And the third one is we know that the Russian logistics are weak. We don't know too much about the Ukrainian logistics, but as long as we keep supporting Ukraine with supplies, then there will be a tilt to them when they can go on a larger counteroffensive and could wrap this up in short order, or in shorter order than we think, within a number of months.
On a broader question, so we're seeing how this country, the United Kingdom and the US, are very much in the forefront of helping to equip and arm Ukraine. Huge resources being poured in by Britain and America, and some of the eastern NATO countries also keen to join that effort. They're being backfilled, as it were, by equipment from countries like this one and like America. But we're also seeing now some reports that the European Union, which the major players of the European Union are not matching that effort to arm Ukraine, but they are, it is said, thinking about the peace and investing in the reconstruction of Ukraine when the war comes. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but that time will come. Tell me, as a strategist, how important is it for a country like this one, for our country, to be there winning the peace as well as the war?
Well, the object of a war is always a better peace. The key question is from whose perspective and whose rules will apply. Of course, there's different types of aid which are being given at the moment. There's military aid, there's humanitarian aid, and there's financial aid. So, for example, even though they're not part of NATO, the seventh largest provider along that line is Sweden, which, of course, aspires to join NATO at the moment. So you must try and win the peace. The difficulty at the moment is we know why fighting stops, and we also know why fighting doesn't stop. It's not going to stop at the moment in military terms. There's no decisive military victory. Neither is there a improbability of victory at the moment for either side. And each decision maker, the leaders, and this is the dilemma for Putin, that one of the reasons that fighting doesn't stop is you need sufficient equity in the solution to justify the sacrifice. And that is also a weakness why Putin may ultimately go if the elites fracture from him.
Right. Let me just finally ask you this, as a former commander at the very heart of NATO, when we see Turkey threatening to block the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO, which would be a hugely important development, does that worry you?
No, that's transactional. That's not a final refusal. That is really to do with a number of things to do with terrorist organizations, the way they look at the PPK and the YPG, and also the Gulenists, those who were part of the attempted military coup. So they're doing that for their own domestic reasons. That will not be something which will impede Finland and Sweden joining the NATO ultimately.